Okay, so we're going to start with what is autism spectrum disorder? And looking at the term of autism, it's a neurodevelopmental condition that can impact brain function, causing social, communication, and behavioral challenges. And to put that in more simple terms, it's a difference in how the brain works and functions that can impact or change how you might interact with other individuals or your environment and how you might behave in those environments. And like I mentioned before, the autism is a spectrum. It reflects a wide variation in challenges and strengths that are possessed by each person with an autism, with that autism diagnosis. Okay. Now, in Canada, the prevalence rates of autism are approximately 1 in 50 children who are diagnosed, and we're seeing approximately 4 times as many boys as girls that are diagnosed with autism. This was the most recent information that came out from the Public Health Agency of Canada from information that was collected in 2019. Now, we have been seeing over the past decades, there's been a trend for these rates to be rising, and a lot of this can be attributed to things like better analytic tools, identification and screening methods. There have been changes in the diagnostic criteria. So before there were different terms that were related to autism, but may not have been called autism. One of the more commonly referred or known ones is Asperger's, but now everything is under that autism umbrella and considered the autism spectrum. There is now an increased awareness among parents, clinicians, and people who work with children and youth. And there's changes in the availability of services, which of course increases that awareness as well, and cultural acceptance of the diagnosis over the years. Okay. So with the most current diagnostic criteria for autism, it looks at 2 aspects. There's social communication and restricted and repetitive behaviors. I'm going to go into more details in a moment about what those 2 areas look like. But within the diagnosis, we also refer to the levels of support that are required. So for level 1, it would be that your child requires support in either of those 2 areas, but may not be extensive support. It might just be mild support in order to best help them in whatever area they need support. Level 2, they require more substantial support. And level 3 is they require very substantial support. So level 1 is more that mild level of support that's needed, and level 3 is the more extensive support. So for example, looking at social communication, level 1 might be that your child is verbal, able to express themselves, but may have a little bit of difficulty with that social communication. Level 3, it might be that your child is nonverbal and that they need to develop other tools, either through pictures or augmentative communication devices to help with that support. So looking more specifically at the 2 areas, for social communication, we're looking at things in deficits in social emotional reciprocity, deficits in nonverbal communication, and this would be things like eye contact, gestures, picking up on social cues and body language, and deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. I'm going to go over in a little bit more detail specifically what that would mean or what that would look like at different ages. On the other side, we have the restrictive and repetitive behaviors. So some of these things your child may exhibit when they are younger, and they may have grown out of that as they grow older. Some of it may not have been present when they are younger, but become more obvious as they become more engaged and interact with their environment. But it's things like the stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, using objects or speech, insistence on sameness or inflexible adherence to routines, highly restricted fixated interests, or hypo or hyper reactivity to sensory information, or that they're really interested in those sensory aspects of their environment. So let's break that down, what it actually means, what it actually looks like at different ages. So the signs and symptoms that you might notice in toddlers and young children, we'll start with that social communication part. In really young children, you might notice that they're not using eye contact, or they're not using their eye contact in a communicative way. They may not point to express interest or to show, and you have to anticipate their needs a bit more. If you call their name, they may not respond, or it could be very inconsistent. They may have been more focused on the activities as opposed to the people around them. Same thing with gestures, copying actions, or their social smiles. It might be inconsistent, or you might not see them using it at all. They might not show an interest in other children. They may not start or initiate social games like peekaboo or pretend play. They may enjoy it if you start and interact, but if you stopped, or they may not continue it, or they may not show an interest outside of you initiating it. And often with the little kiddos, one of the red flags we see right away are those speech and language delays. And this includes if your child may not be babbling, may not understand simple instructions, there might, so that there's those communication delays. Okay. And in young children, it doesn't have to be all of those because every child is different, but these are some of the signs that we look for in the really young children. On the behavioral side, you might notice things like repetitive behaviors with toys or objects like spinning wheels, turning off and on lights, opening and closing doors, and not just once or twice, but more in a repetitive way instead of playing with items that are more functionally. You might notice that they have an intense interest in a certain object or toy, so they might be holding an item in their hand all the time or have to have things with them, otherwise they may become distressed. They may or may not have be upset by change or prefer a routine. So sometimes little kids are very go with the flow, and it's as they get older, you might notice it a little bit more. So maybe more young children than toddlers. So you might notice more when they start that transition to preschool or kindergarten. You may notice those changes in routines more. They may interact with toys in unexpected ways. So they may line up toys, they may stack and sort and put them in piles instead of playing with the toys as they're meant to be played with. You might notice repetitive movements in their body. When they're younger, it could be things like rocking or walking on their tiptoes or jumping or flapping their hands. And you may notice that they're very sensitive to sensory experiences or interested in sensory experiences. So commonly in the young kiddos, we might see noises that really bother them where they cover their ears, or you may have to avoid places because it's too loud, like public bathrooms or malls or grocery stores or things that are too loud. Or the textures of clothing is another common one for little kids. So those are some of the signs and symptoms you might see for little kids. Like I mentioned, some kids grow out of it or it evolves into other areas that you might notice. So if you're wondering about a diagnosis for an older child or how the symptoms might change, for kids that are verbal, you may notice that in conversation, they have difficulties with small talk chat, difficulty taking turns. They may talk a lot about their special interests, but have trouble with other conversations. And they might take things very literally or might misinterpret jokes. Even if they're really good at being sarcastic and doing jokes themselves, they may not understand in others. They may have differences in tone of voice. So it might be more formal language. They might only use one tone of voice when speaking. There may be challenges in reading nonverbal cues, like I mentioned before, like body language or tone of voice. They may avoid or be uncomfortable with eye contact, although as individuals get older, they recognize socially you need to, so they develop their own tips and tricks of how to do it. So maybe instead of looking at eyes, looking at other parts of the face. They may show fewer emotions on their face, which doesn't mean they're not experiencing it. It just to the outside world, they may not see it in the same way. And they may not use gestures as frequently in communication. As you see, I talk with my hands a lot, whereas other people may not do that. They may prefer to spend time alone or want to play by their own rules. So having trouble adapting to the rules of others, or just preferring to do things on their own instead of being in groups. Autistic kiddos can be quite and very social. They may have trouble kind of getting started or maintaining those relationships or adjusting their behaviors, picking up on those unwritten social rules. On the behavioral side, once again, there's those special interests that we see where they can, really hyper focus on things that they're interested in, and it lasts for quite long periods of time. This is where you might see more common those upset and changes in things like routines, or if things aren't in a certain way. The repetitive body movements you may still see, but it might be it might be more socially acceptable ones that aren't as obvious, but it's still kind of, we call it that stimming behavior that helps with self-regulation. And once again, you may see those sensory sensitivities as well. And some kiddos are able to express more what they are sensitive to, and may find ways to kind of adapt their lifestyle. So I know a lot of the kids and teens I work with prefer a lot of comfortable clothing and soft clothing, because once again, that helps them regulate better. Okay. What we also start seeing, there's not a lot of research on this topic yet. It is starting to emerge more, but masking is something we see often with older children and youth, where it's in hiding or not showing aspects of yourself in order to seem neurotypical, and so you don't seem socially different from others. So you might copy other people's behavior. You're going to monitor and really question past actions or your appearance. You may suppress those stimming behaviors, so you wait until you're home and alone and you don't do it in public anymore. But masking and keeping all that up can be very exhausting, and it can often lead to mental health challenges, including things like anxiety and depression.
Let me unmute myself so everyone can actually hear me. So now that Haley has given us a really great overview of, what does autism actually look like and how do we diagnose and what are some of the things that we're looking for, we're going to start to shift a little bit to really understanding that overlap between the autism and mental health symptoms that you might see in some of your kiddos. So children with autism are at a higher risk of health-related challenges, and that does include mental health diagnoses. And so if you look on the screen there, we have some stats for you. So for example, up to about 70% of children with autism actually do have a mental health diagnosis. And this is usually things like anxiety or depression or ADHD. And between 40 and 50% of these kiddos and youth actually meet criteria for 2 or more mental health disorders. And so what we often start to see, because our mental health and autism symptoms can be quite similar, is that this leads to some misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed disorders. And that happens because often we end up attributing symptoms to each other. And so what does that actually mean? So a really good example of this is that when we look at something like depression, so when we're trying to diagnose something like depression, your person that is diagnosing, they might attribute some of the symptoms that we're seeing to your autism diagnosis, or they may attribute it to a depression diagnosis when it's actually more related to the autism. So a great example of that is when we have some kiddos that have flat facial expression, flat tone of voice, or aren't super expressive in their emotional experience. And this is more related to their autism profile. It sometimes gets misdiagnosed as depression, but that might not actually be accurate. And on the flip side, it's the same. And so we might actually see depression go undiagnosed because those same features are being attributed to autism when that actually might not be part of that person's autism profile. So if you are trying to better understand some of your child's behaviors and get a better sense of when you might need to look a little bit further into some of the things that you're seeing, there are some questions that we always recommend asking to give you some direction. So one of the big ones is, what is actually considered developmentally normal and appropriate for my child? So for example, at 4 years old, you might be able to sit for 2 minutes and not be able to focus very often and for very long periods of time. And that's actually quite normal at that age range. Whereas when we move to older children at 14, that might be something that isn't typical for that child. And we might be expecting them to be able to focus for longer periods of time. And so that might start to pique your interest a little bit if it is different from your child's typical presentation. And so that kind of goes into our second question, right? What is actually considered normal and consistent for my child's autism diagnosis if your child does have that diagnosis? So are some of the things that I'm seeing, are those different than what I'm used to seeing from them? So for example, if your child does typically really like to withdraw from others, they're more introverted, they enjoy individual play and doing that on their own, and they're comfortable with that, then that might be more related to their autism diagnosis, and that's normal for you to see that. But if that is something that has really come up out of nowhere and you're not sure where that's come from, it might be that that is something we want to look more into, because that's a change in the baseline behavior. Just some quick other questions that you could ask are there some life or situational changes that have happened recently? Have you had a big move, a separation, a death in the family that might be playing into or exacerbating some of the mood or regulation challenges or changes that you're seeing? And are some of the behaviors and moods that I'm seeing actually going above what I would expect from my child? So you'll hear me say this 100 times, don't count, because I can't say it's actually 100, throughout this presentation, that what we're really wanting you to look for when you're curious about whether mental health could be playing a role is this different from my child's typical presentation? Am I seeing an increase in frequency and intensity of some of these different symptoms? And that's how we kind of differentiate between autism, mental health, or both. So because it's very complex, understanding the differences between these diagnoses, it's also really important to consider the other domains that are present in your child's life that could be contributing to some of the changes that you're seeing in their behavior, or some of the things that are starting to bring up questions for you. So for example, it's really important to look into the health-related factors. So monitoring things like sleep, eating, levels of physical activity, and the different ways that medications are interacting with your child's ability to regulate and the behaviors they might be having is really important. And so we always recommend seeking advice from your general practitioner or your pediatrician, having them do a physical check of your kiddo, and just following up if any of that could be playing a role in some of the behaviors that you're seeing. Additionally, educational and learning environments are a huge space where our kids and youth spend lots of time. And so it's really important too to look into those pieces. Are there actually learning challenges that are happening in the classroom that might be leading to them feeling more dysregulated and more exhausted? And so we're seeing more of those behaviors. Is there an undiagnosed disability? Is there a learning disability or something else that could be playing in that's just making it more challenging for them to function in the classroom environment? And because they spend so much time there, then function in their world as a whole a little bit more challenging. And the third one, again, is that environmental changes. So big changes and shifts in your life, or even to the physical environment. So we know that our kiddos with autism often have some sensory related symptoms and also like things to be the same and our struggle with transition. And so how we move the furniture around, are the lights different? Is that playing into how they're experiencing the world and making it a little bit more challenging for them? And all of those things could be true, and none of those things could be true, but it's important to kind of look into some of those pieces first. Then that brings us to, okay, so what are some examples of behaviors that you might see that could be attributed to autism, mental health, or both? And it's important to be aware of whether or not you're seeing an increase, again, I'm saying it again, an increase in frequency or intensity of these behaviors above and beyond what you're used to seeing from your child. So what is typical to your individual child? So some of the examples of things that you might see that might kind of flag for you are avoiding novelty or uncertainty. So are they really avoidant of some of the things they used to enjoy doing? So if they're really social, are they avoiding school and they don't really want to be in new situations that they don't know what's going to happen or they haven't been before? Are they withdrawing from social situations, right? So if they really enjoyed their after school hockey league, do they not really want to do that anymore all of a sudden? Are they more irritable and explosive? Are they resisting that change in routine, which is kind of different for them? Do they have an increase in their restricted or repetitive behaviors that you're typically seeing from them? Is there a decreased ability to feel and express joy? So are you noticing that they don't seem as joyful in their day-to-day life? Are they having general body complaints? So are they complaining of headaches or stomach aches or, not being able to sleep? Abnormal sleep is our next one, right? The sleep piece is really big for our kiddos. And so tracking, again, is there changes in some of these areas? That could be some of the things that you want to look out for when we're considering, do I need to look into this further? All right. So with that all being said, there are some kind of red flags we wanted to highlight for you that might signify, hey, there might be something mental health related going on here, because this isn't typical to what I'm seeing from my kiddo. So some of examples of that, and it's going to be a little bit of repetitive, but is changes in sleep. And so in my work with the kiddos that come to see me, this is one of the first things that parents actually flag for me is that, you know, when I noticed the behaviors starting to escalate, they were complaining that they weren't sleeping, they were resisting going to bed, or they weren't sleeping through the night anymore. That's really a big one to pay attention to. Also, are there worries that are coming up for them that are actually starting to interfere with their ability to complete and engage with daily activities? So are they avoiding going to school? Are they really unable to function when you leave the house because they're so worried about what might be going on when you're not there? Is that something that's new that's not typically there for them? That could be a red flag to look out for. Again, are they avoiding those social situations or people that used to bring them joy or they used to enjoy doing? Is there that unexplained change in the grades or a school avoidance that's not typical for them? And is there a change in their emotional regulation? So are we seeing more crying and meltdowns and irritability and withdrawing from others? And then two of the really big ones that are important for us to pay attention to is, are we seeing the expression of feelings of guilt, hopelessness, worthlessness, and shame? And on top of that, are we starting to see some comments and statements around suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, so thinking about wanting to die, and self-harm? Or are we actually seeing self-harming behaviors happening? When you do see some of these behaviors, it is really important to take these things seriously and just provide the support to your kiddo that they need to help keep them safe. Safety first is always the most important role in our job when I have kiddos come to see me. And so there are places that you can seek support because this can be really overwhelming and scary to hear from your child. So you can access local agency crisis lines. So great examples that I always give to my children and youth is Kids Help Phone. So you can encourage your own child to access Kids Help Phone. They also have a texting line, which I find that the teenagers I work with much prefer than having to talk to someone. But that's a 24/7 line that you can access. There's also 310 COPE, which is in the York region, that parents can also access if they're needing some additional support with how to help their child. You can also call 911. If you're really in a place where your child is unsafe, a lot of our police departments now are paired with other crisis and mental health agencies to provide that mental health support when you do make those phone calls. So for example, in Barrie, the Barrie Police do have a partnership with RVH, the hospital, to provide that support on those calls when they're available. So that can be helpful. And accessing your local hospital emergency room if you're really needing to ensure that your child is safe and you're worried that they might harm themselves. The other big piece that's really hard for parents is if you are noticing that your child does seem to be a lot more down, they seem really sad, it's important to ask the question around whether or not they may be having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, because we want to know and make sure that we can support them. And like I said, there's lots of areas that you can access support for those things because it is quite scary when that pops up. So we do appreciate that. All right, so why does this matter? Why is it important that we actually start to notice some of these things? And the answer is we want to be preventative. So it's really important to be preventative when it comes to mental health and behavioral challenges because we want to set our kiddo up for success as they get older. So the sooner we can get in there and help them to develop those coping strategies and to stress tolerance, the better. When some of these challenges do start to move into adulthood, we do see some longer term challenges that can be related to this. So things like decreased quality of life, challenges with accessing housing, education, and jobs, interpersonal challenges, and difficulty with maintaining positive relationships, increased psychiatric emergency, and your involvement with the justice system as well. So it's really important that we be preventative and proactive. And there's lots of ways that we can support your child when they're young and into their youth. So just some examples of what are the actual co-occurring mental health diagnoses that we're seeing with kiddos with autism. In my practice, I often see kiddos with anxiety. That's really one of the big ones that comes through. I work directly and only with individuals that have an autism diagnosis. So one of the biggest ones that I see when they have the mental health challenges as well is anxiety-related disorders. But we also often see things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ADHD, depression, eating disorders, intellectual disabilities, speech and language delays, motor difficulties, and again, the sleep difficulties. So all of those things can be happening at the same time for autistic children and youth.
Better. Okay, we have a couple of examples how to illustrate what Chantal was just describing in terms of the overlap that we see between it could be autism and mental health, or the complexity of teasing out, is it autism, is it mental health, or is it both? So let's use that example of anxiety Chantal mentioned, with the kids she works with and the kids I see, I should say not just kids and youth, there's often those feelings of anxiety. And I think everyone can relate to that because everyone's experienced anxiety at some point in their life. Anxiety is adaptive. It can be a good thing. It alerts us that something is either important to us and can really provide motivation and protective features for us. So it keeps us out of the way of things that could be dangerous, makes us alert when we're crossing the street, etc., or not to go to places that could be dangerous. Or if we have an assignment or a test coming up, it motivates us to do things like study. So anxiety can be very good, but what happens is that sometimes anxiety runs out of control. It can be overwhelming and it can interfere with life and can become more detrimental. But there's different factors that can contribute to anxiety, things that are situational, environmental, or personal. And when it starts to impact with our day-to-day life, there could be something else going on. So kind of on one side of things, we see things that are more typical for anxiety, a little bit of level. If you're shy, if you're in a new situation, those things, it's perfectly natural to feel a little bit anxious until you kind of warm up or get to know the new setting or who you're with. If you have things like communication barriers and you can't communicate or get your thoughts across, it could make you feel like you're in a very anxious type situation. Might not be an anxiety diagnosis, but you could be experiencing those feelings of anxiety. If you have experienced trauma in your past, as a trauma response, you could have experiences of anxiety as well. For our, the children and youth that we work with that have an autism diagnosis, some features often are things like more rigid thinking or difficulties with transitions, some of those social challenges they may experience, or the sensory experiences. So anything that goes outside of those routines or outside of their comfort zone, you might get those feelings of anxiety, and that could be features of autism for them. But when it becomes more, when it becomes, so socially anxious that you can't interact, that you're starting to avoid going to school, that you used to do things that you used to enjoy and you're no longer doing it because you are scared, worried, spending so much time to decrease those feelings of anxiety, that once again can be a flag that there's something more going on. Another example, and I'm going to flip it on the side of a symptom you might see and more kind of the diagnosis, is difficulty focusing. Once again, this is something that I'm sure everyone has experienced at some point in their life, and it can be a variety of reasons that can lead to difficulty focusing. So if you're looking at just day-to-day life, if you are tired, if you are hungry, if you have been staring at a screen for hours, those things are natural ways that you would have difficulty focusing if you didn't sleep well the night before. So those are kind of all natural things that could happen on a day-to-day basis. Then you have things like the diagnoses that all could have symptoms of difficulty focusing. So with autism, we often see difficulty focusing if a child is more interested in the interests that they have to think about, or they are focusing on all the sensory experiences in their environment. That's what they're focusing on instead. So depending on what your child's autism profile looks like, it might show you different ways that they have trouble focusing. But then sometimes that goes above and beyond, where there's, a lot of challenges with inattention, hyperactivity, can't sit still, needing the constant motion, very impulsive, blurting things out. So then it might be more related to ADHD or an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder diagnosis. If once again, it's starting to impair your everyday functioning. Something like if you have a learning challenge or a learning disability, it might be really hard to focus on something that is really hard for you to do. Your brain is processing all this information. It's not kind of clicking in like it is for other kids or other teens in the class. So that once again can make it very difficult to focus on the things that you need to focus on at that point. And then, of course, mood-related things, anxiety, depression, if you have experienced trauma, can also make it hard to focus as well. So we can see that a parent or a youth or a child may come with this symptom or this feeling of I'm having trouble focusing, and there's a whole host of reasons why that could be happening. So once again, it's the people that you're working with, the family team, clinicians, all the people can help maybe tease apart and provide supports on how that feature is impacting your child. Looking more specifically at autism and autistic related stressors that can contribute to some of these mental health challenges. Autistic individuals, they may experience mental health challenges just like anybody else, but how they communicate those feelings, how they interact with others, it may look different because, like I mentioned earlier, we spoke about earlier, the tone of voice, facial expression, body language, social communication styles, all of those can impact. And so what happens is that situations that might be a autism related stressor, so it could be you have social challenges which may lead to, unfortunately, to rejection or bullying, or if you have challenges with communication, you may get very frustrated that people aren't understanding you how you want them to, right? Or if you're just a very rigid thinker and it's hard for you to pivot, then you might get those feelings of stress and anxiety that might increase when things don't go as expected. So all of these stressors can kind of lead to an increase in that negative mood. And then having that negative mood or those emotional dysregulation can lead an increase in those autism mental health symptoms that can then further exacerbate those autism related stressors. So what we see is this feedback loop that keeps happening to kind of increase those stressors. So we see a lot of that mental health impact because of the challenges of someone who's neurodivergent trying to interact in a neurotypical environment in a world that's just, in settings that just not suiting their needs. And sometimes it's something as simple as adapting the environment, having someone aware of the communication differences and meeting people at where they're at and the supports they need in order to kind of stop this loop from happening.
Okay, so now that we have all of this information, what do we do with it? And how do we support our kiddos and our youth that we might be concerned around their mental health challenges, or if you're concerned about an autism diagnosis and what might be going on there? So there are lots of ways that we can intervene and lots of different types of therapeutic supports that you can access to support your children. So of course, the first one, because it's our topic, is our mental health interventions. It is important to note that there's a lot of evidence-based mental health interventions that can be adapted to meet the specific needs of your child with autism. So for an example, we have cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. You may have heard this one. It's one that's often practiced in community agencies. And this approach really focuses on how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all interconnected, and it helps individuals to identify, challenge, and change this cycle. And so we're really focusing on that cognitive piece. So what's going on in our brain, what's happening with our thoughts, and how we feel in the ways that actually ultimately leads to how we behave. And another one is dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. This falls into a similar category as cognitive behavioral. It's still a cognitive approach, but it's a more intensive form that we typically see used with our kiddos that are having some of those higher risk behaviors. So things like the suicidal ideation and self-harm or other high-risk behaviors, we find that those kiddos are more suited to a DBT approach because it is more intensive. And it really focuses on teaching individuals how to cope with stress, develop emotional regulation skills, and how to develop more positive relationship and interpersonal relationship skills in general. And the reason that we use mental health interventions is because they can be really helpful in addressing the cognitive pieces, like I mentioned, that really lead to these challenges and the symptoms that we're seeing. They help individuals to better understand their ways of thinking, to learn more positive ways to cope, and to better their distress tolerance skills, and to understand why the behavior exists and why does it continue to happen. So we really focus on that realm in the mental health world. The additional piece is that it's really helpful for parents. And so you can get some really great parenting support through your mental health clinicians on how you can best support your child's emotional regulation and what are some different ways to engage with your child that really increases their ability to do that and to feel safe and regulated within their environment. But of course, because it's complicated, there are also lots of other disciplines that can be really beneficial and supportive if you are concerned about any type of mood-related or autism-related symptoms for your kiddos. So a really great one is applied behavioral analysis, or ABA. So ABA really focuses on taking those observation and data from their own environment and providing you with some environmental or behavioral strategies to help you as parents and as kiddos reduce the overall amounts of emotional distress you're feeling based off of, the rigid thinking, challenges with transitions, and some of those autism symptoms that we see. We can provide some more security in those areas to bring down the overall levels of emotional distress. We also have occupational therapy, or OT. So this is similar. They can do similar things to an ABA consultant, but really what they focus on and what they're really great at specializing in is the sensory piece. So having a really good understanding of what is your child's sensory needs and how can we implement some different strategies that will help to decrease overall levels of emotional dysregulation that our kiddos experience when they're sensory overloaded all the time. It's really hard to remain regulated and focused when everything feels overwhelming all of the time. And so OT is really great for supporting with that, as well as some of the social skills pieces that, again, like Haley mentioned, can lead to both mental health and autism-related symptoms and really feed into that loop that we were talking about. And the last one that I really wanted to highlight is speech language pathology, or SLP. Like we said previously, kiddos with autism, they might express themselves in different ways or have a more challenging time getting across their needs and how they're feeling. And this can lead to some challenges with emotional regulation. And so SLP is really helpful in increasing their ability to effectively communicate what they need and also encourage their ability to engage positively in social ways. So those social skills, again, we're working on some of those things in SLP. So all of these different disciplines are really helpful to provide that wraparound support and can provide your children with different types of support in different ways, but are all really useful when you're starting to worry about any mental health related challenges. There's at home. So what can you actually do at home? What can you take away from this presentation and do with your own kiddos if you're really wanting to support them? We've listed some coping skills here that are really easy to adapt into the home environment and really can be found with a quick Google search. There's so much information about all of these different types of regulation and calming strategies out there that is really fantastic. So a great example is deep breathing. If you're trying to do this with a teenager, I have learned from experience, they don't love deep breathing, but I really try to convince them that it is great because what it does is it brings down our physical arousal and allows us to physically relax. So it's a really wonderful tool to use with our kids and our youth. So deep breathing, there's an example of 4 square breathing on the screen there that you can see that teaches you when to hold, when to breathe in and when to exhale. You can use breathing shapes for younger kiddos, which again, you could do a quick Google search and it actually gives you a picture and you can use your finger to follow the picture and it'll prompt you when to breathe, when to hold, and when to exhale. So those are really great. Other really good ones are distracting them with pleasurable activities and self-soothing activities. So things they already like to do and they already do to help them to feel more regulated, right? So that could be spending time together, taking a break in a quiet space, jumping on a trampoline, bouncing around the house, going for a run, whatever it is that you need to do to help engage your child in those positive activities and calming things that already are pleasurable for them. And of course, we also have things like positive self-talk or affirmation, visualization, and progressive muscle relaxation, which are all really great to help to calm some of our nervous systems and promote that emotional regulation. Like I said, you can find these all online. I really love the site Go Noodle for our younger kiddos. They use these a lot in the schools as well, but it just provides you those videos that you can use with your kids to highlight a lot of these different strategies that we're talking about. And then the final piece that we wanted to hit on, and that's really important when we're thinking about what can you as parents do at home or as other community support partners, it's really important that we teach our kids with autism about their emotions. So autistic children, they might not learn inherently the same way about their emotions and how those feel and what that looks like as our neurotypical kiddos do. And so it's really important that we're actually giving them this emotional language to help them to better understand what's happening for them, as well as how to rate the intensity of their emotions. So you can see we have a feelings thermometer on the screen. I use that all the time in my practice in helping kids to understand when my emotions are really big and when they're small and when they're kind of in the middle. And then also making the connection with them between how their body feels physically and the emotions that they're having, right? We can imagine that if all of these things are happening to you, your heart is racing, you have an upset stomach, you really don't feel well, that's going to lead to emotional dysregulation because it's hard for them to know what that actually means. And so we really want to support them in having a better understanding of what's going on inside their bodies and as well with their emotions.
And all of those things that Chantal just mentioned, there are the other parent education series that are the videos are on the CNARC website that also go into more detail of some of the strategies that you can use. A lot more that was outside the scope of today because we could talk about these things for hours. So I do encourage you to check out those parent eds again if you haven't already, if you didn't attend them, because they give you more strategies and talk about those things in a bit more detail. So other resources and supports that are out there of what you can do. If you suspect your child may have autism, now from that poll at the beginning, it didn't seem like anyone was, but for those professionals that are coming from the community or such, if you suspect that someone you're working with may have autism, one of the things we do recommend for families is to speak with your child's either their family doctor or pediatrician, the school team or treatment team about their concerns. So you're getting kind of another perspective, you're sharing that information, kind of flagging it that it is something that you're worried about. And then in terms of kind of getting a diagnosis from a family doctor, a pediatrician, or in some regions, the referral comes from the school team. You can get a referral to the diagnostic hubs. Some school teams, they do autism assessments if they're school-aged populations. They do them within the school system, depending on your region and school board. Others, it gets referred to the diagnostic hub, and or you can seek out an assessment from other qualified professionals such as doctors, so family physicians, pediatricians, developmental pediatricians, or psychiatrists. They are able to diagnose. It will depend on their training and knowledge of autism, but so you might need to get that referral to specialists who have that knowledge. Among that list, it's usually the pediatricians or developmental pediatricians, and psychiatrists are often, we see a lot more for those teenage age kiddos, or psychologists or psychological associates. They can also do a comprehensive assessment looking at all of the areas that we looked at, but also autism in particular. And as a parent, what you can do if you have concerns that are either autism or mental health related is I highly, highly recommend that you come prepared with with information to share with professionals. So what are some examples of the behaviors that you're observing? So if you have a young kiddo or your new diagnosis, what are those things that are concerning that make you wonder about autism? Or if it's the mental health, because often when, you bring your child child to these appointments, they sometimes behave very differently than what you see at home. So writing down examples of the behaviors, how often they're happening, what they look like, if you recognize what those triggers are that cause those behaviors to happen, things that happened in the past, things that are happening now, so differentiating about it. If your child already has that autism diagnosis and you're worried about mental health, what is different for your child to kind of stress, my child, this is different for them. This is what they were like before. This is what they're experiencing now. All of those are great information to give to those professionals. I always recommend write it down because I know in the moment, it can be very hard to remember, especially with when whoever you're meeting with is asking questions or, going through the process. A lot can bring up a lot of emotions in yourself as well. So write down as much as you can. Talk with others to write it down and get those ideas on paper, and bring it or on a note app or something when you're taking it to an appointment. And also, you have a right to bring a supportive family member or friend to any of these appointments if you choose and if your child consents, if they're of consenting age, to once again support you in the process and to help kind of communicate what those needs are. And also, for when the professional speaks with you, so you can kind of take in and soak, sometimes having that additional supportive person can help with that process as well.
So these are just some examples on the screen of some different books that we recommend that are related to autism or mental health, where you will get a copy of some of these pieces so that you can take it home. We won't go through all of them, but just some examples of different books. There's lots of books on autism and mental health, and we highly recommend to parents, if you have the time, to go through and read some of them. They can be really helpful. And the other resources we really wanted to share were some websites and apps to just be aware of. So apps are really great, especially with our youth and teenagers. Things like Go Noodle, Mindshift, and the Calm app are really helpful to be using some of those calming strategies that we mentioned before. Additionally, if you want to learn more about autism, there are a lot of educational offerings through various different agencies. There's lots, but we just provided a couple of examples on the screen here. So Kinark Autism Services has Family Education Series. There's Autism Ontario, as well as Carrie's Place, that offer different resources and educational programming. And just of note, if you have older children, both Autism Ontario and Carrie's Place do also have resources and programming that are geared toward individuals that are 18 plus. And again, there's lots of others that can be really helpful depending on your region and where you live. This is just a couple of examples that we wanted to provide you.